Hi, this is Graham Quince for CreativeCow.net. I'm going to show you today how you can create what I think is this really beautiful, intense sun just in Cinema 4D. We won't be using any other plugins. It's all just done in Cinema 4D. I'm going to be using Cinema 4D 11.5, but as far as I know, everything I'm showing you works in both much older and all the newer versions as well. Okay, first of all, here's a scene I've put together which you might recognize as being similar to what you've seen before. We've got a point light with a sun lens flare on it. Just show you that. That's our point light there. And we've got a spaceship in the foreground. Now, it looks fine and cool from this sort of angle. But what happens, or look what happens when I do this. I'll just hide the very center of that light, that point of that light, just in front of that gun turret, just behind that gun turret. And suddenly the light in that lens flare completely disappears because it is only a point of light. Even though if I do that, move it so we can just see it, quick RAM preview, oh, it's there. And that looks great and it's nice and intense. But the second it goes away, the second it goes behind, it gets completely hidden and it loses that effect. So I'm going to show you a different way to create a sun that will have some dimensionality to it and won't be just a point of light. Let's start with a new scene in Cinema 4D. And I'll create a light. And because I'm slightly retentive, I'm just going to put it at 0, 0, 0. Okay. Now the first thing I'm going to do on this light is I'm going to set it to a visible light. Pull back a bit and quickly show you. We get this sort of soft orby thing. I'm sure there's uses for that, but we're going to go a little bit further than that. It would be a really short tutorial if I was like, there, job done. We're going to go over to the noise tab, and on noise I'm going to change it from none to visibility, so that it's going to affect the visibility, and the type I'm going to set to wavy turbulence. I'll show you what that does immediately. Okay, so now it's kind of this weird sort of foggy looking light. I'm not exactly sure you could use it for anything as it is. So I'm going to make a few changes. The octaves, which is pretty much the complexity, I'm going to set up to 8. And the velocity, which I have no idea what it does, but I added it on when fiddling, I'm setting to 50%. I'm going to drop the brightness down to minus 100%. And I'm going to up the contrast to 350. And we're getting this sort of shape now. Now what I'm also going to do is, again, this is all from playing around, but I'm going to change the visibility scale to 4. And while I'm here, and even though I'm not going to use this for an animation right now, I'm going to set the wind to 5. And that's its evolution speed. It's going to move around at 5 meters instead of what it was set to, 1. Quick RAM preview, render preview even. Alright, okay, now we're getting somewhere already, sort of. That's almost like the smoke you'd see inside a crystal ball or something. There's definitely something there that's usable. But we'll make a few more changes by clicking on the visibility tab. And in here, you see the inner distance is set to 0. That's the point where the light is at its brightest. The visible light is at its brightest. So it's immediately fading from 0 to 500. If I increase this to 450, you see we get another sphere inside the outer sphere. When I render that. Okay, now what we're getting is a big ball, but it's like it's almost a perfect sphere of gas. I'm sure there are jokes. But what we'll do is, if I can do a couple more tweaks on the general tab, and it'll make it a lot more sun-like. I'll go and pick an orangey, yellowy colour. Maybe a bit more orange, something like that. I'm also going to up the intensity to 200%. Preview that. Okay, now we've got something I think's already starting to look better. It's kind of Jupiter-like. We've got big storms of swirling gas, but we've got it all contained. It doesn't feel like the sun yet, though. There's no, there's just no sort of glow or corona on it. So And we're going to change light to body. And now I'm going to duplicate this light just by holding down Control and dragging upwards. And I'm going to call this Halo. It could, as I say, I could have called it the Corona, but I don't know if that's the technically correct term. And other beers and first-person shooter games are also applicable as names. I feel I should point out. Okay, joking aside, if that was a joke, what I'm going to do now in Halo is I'm going to change it from being a visible light to a volumetric one. Now, we're going to turn off the noise because we don't need that anymore. And if I go to visibility, what we're saying is that if I just solo it for the moment, don't need to do that because it is just on that one. What I'm saying is that we're just looking at the halo light right now. In fact, if we do that, you can see. And we're saying that we want the effect to stop at 500 meters. Well, the trouble with that is that's where the body is already. So we actually need to double this effect. And through experimentation, I've also found 200 meters is about right for the innermost brightness of it. Now render preview that. Okay, that's what we're achieving. That's pretty much it. Job done. Oh, I suppose I've got a few more minutes to talk about. So I'm going to continue on and show you a couple of other elements of this that'll make your lives a lot easier. But I've found that this bit with this the noise and the wavy turbulence sells most of it for me. There is one other element I wanted to show you, and if you remember, I turned off the noise tab when I went to it. Here's what happens if I leave it on for visibility for the halo, for the Corona. There, you should be able to start to see it's creating a much more interesting, much noisier, much more violent looking sun. And I'm sure this has many, many uses too. I didn't include it when I was doing my first round preview of this because, all things considered, you don't necessarily want to see it. But of course, there's no reason at all to remove it if you're wanting that look. And so I didn't want to suggest that you should never use it. I'll just show you it from a different angle. Of course, the beauty of doing a light in this way is you get a three-dimensionality to it. So yeah, as you can see, it adds a whole different element, and it's really noisy, and you get some cool looking sunspots. Okay, the next thing I really wanted to show you is about, well, it's all to do with movie conventions. Let's add a planet, or, well, basically a sphere. Right, and that's really nice and close. I'll drop that. So it's well within. And when we line that up and quick preview, so you know this is the equivalent of Mercury. Okay, there's a couple of things immediately I'm seeing. It's far too intense. I mean, it should be at this range, I guess, but it really is very intense. So that's because it's got two lights on it, both at 200%. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the body tab, the body object, and on the scene tab I'm going to change mode to include, and that means anything in here is going to be lit, but anything not particularly specified in this box will not be lit and will not have the lights act on it. And I'm sure you saw when I switched it from exclude to include, the intensity of the light disappeared. Okay, well, you can play around with that, and there are various different methods you can use. I'm kind of going to talk about one of them in a second, so I'm going to leave it as it is for now. But let's go back, and this is what I mean about movie convention terms. If we keep going back and back and back to, say, here, and we'll put in planet 2, we have our sun, which is looking cool, and this planet really close up is all lit orange. But the chances are you don't want this planet, planet 2, to be lit with an orange light. movie convention terms say that we should have an orange sun but it should produce a white light unless you're really up close. If you're at this light, if you're at this planet, we should definitely be seeing orange. But if you're all the way back here, it should be white. Now this is where Falloff comes into place. I'm going to highlight both lights, and I'm going to go into the Details tab. And here I'm going to set Falloff to inverse square. Technically, I think that's right. I'm not sure. Also, I'll set it to 1,000 meters, just so it matches at least the corona. Again, it could be set to whatever we want. And when I render that, our planet has now completely disappeared. It's not being lit by anything at all, which is kind of no good either. So let's highlight body, and we'll jump back to the star. Ooh, space travel. And what I'm going to do is I'm now going to control and drag and duplicate body again. I'm going to call this illumination. So we can see. Now, what I'm going to do on illumination is I'm going to set the color to white. I'm going to drop its intensity back down to 100%, and I'm going to turn off visible light. So now we just have a regular point light. I've turned off the fall off there. I've turned off the visibility, so it's no longer visible. I've reset everything, and I turned off the fall off. So now this light is infinite. When I click on it, there we have our yellow sun with our movie convention grey light. Okay, the final thing I want to show you really doesn't have anything to do with lights, but it's all about sort of convenience. What happens if we wanted this sun to go nova, say? We'd have to animate it, and we'd have to animate the body and the corona. And then what happens if we wanted to tweak it? And if you remember, because of the corona with it also being on the halo, with it also being on the Details tab, that's like 5 keyframes we're going to have to start fiddling around with all the time. So I'm going to show you something I've started to use a lot, and it's Xpresso, and this is a really simple use of Xpresso that might get you started with the possibilities of this visual programming tool. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to correct the spelling. I told you I was retentive. Then we're going to highlight all 3 of our lights, right click and choose Group Objects. I'm going to call this null object Sun or Star. Then we're going to right click again on Sun or Star and go to Cinema 4D tags and go all the way down to Xpresso. That's done 2 things. That's added the Xpresso tag here, and it's also opened up the Xpresso editor. And I can get back to the Xpresso editor anytime I want just by double clicking on it. Okay, so we can drag in our sun or star object. And I'll just make it a bit larger so you can see. Now, the way Xpresso works is anything in this column here, this blue topped column here, is an input port. And anything that we put in this red topped column is an output port. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to go into the sun or star, and I'm going to go to user data, and I'm going to go to add user data. I'm going to put in radius, and I'm going to leave the data type as float, but I'm going to go for a float slider, and we want to change the unit to meters. So, and we're going to go up in 1 meter at a time. We'll have a minimum star radius of 300, and let's go crazy. 5,000. Okay. And I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go back into user data, and this time I'm going to add color. I'm going to change the data type to color, and we'll set the default value to kind of where we had it. Yeah, somewhere like that. Alright, click OK. Now these are 2 bits of data I've just created. They could be keyframed. They don't do anything right now other than display here. So, didn't mean to do that. What we can do, but they do appear in Xpresso. In the red topped column, remember I said there, this is the output section. You can click on the red square, go down to user data, and choose radius, and go back down to user data and choose color. And it's created two outputs that correspond to these two. So whatever value I put in here comes out of here, and whatever color I put in here comes out of here. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means if I drag in the body tab, and we'll make this a bit bigger, and go to the input column, and remember we did everything in visibility, so I'm going to go and get VL inner distance and VL outer distance, which is inner distance and outer distance, and immediately I'm going to join up radius to the outer distance. So what that means is if I set this to 300, visibility is set to 300. If I increase this to 2146, outer distance is set to 2146. Now, we don't want to just join up the inner distance to the same, because if you remember when we had it set to 500, we had the inner distance set to 450. So what we need to do now is a bit of Xpresso with the formula. Now if I right click anywhere on this grid desktop area, I get this option up, and I go up to new node, Xpresso, calculate formula. Okay, man. There we go. And I'm going to set an input. Now it says use port name, so we'll check that. And it's got the port. It's called value 1. So if I take radius and send it into value 1 and times, now I like that ratio I had before, so that was 450, but it's out of 500. So basically I'm going to divide it, but it's a percentage thing really. I'm dividing by 500 and I'm multiplying by 450. And then I connect my output to my inner distance. Okay, now what does that mean? That means if I set this to 500, my inner distance is 450. If I set this all the way down to 300, my inner distance is automatically 270. I don't have to do any additional calculations. It's all done for me. Now the halo is slightly different because we set the values differently. So let me just go and get them. And we also want the Falloff. Okay, now I can copy this node, this formula node. It's great, it stops me having to retype. And just copy and paste, and I get them twice. And in this first formula node, remember this is going to be for the inner distance, and remember I said at 500 it would look good at about 200. So I can just type in 200. And the mathematicians will know that 2 divided by 5 is exactly the same as 200 divided by 500. I can connect up my radius. There we go. Now on this formula, it's a lot easier. I want the outer distance of the halo to be double that. So we just get rid of all that and we have 2. And then we connect up our radius to our outer distance and to our Falloff. And if we wanted our Falloff bigger, well, we just have another formula node doing that for us. Now this is kind of where it gets cool, because there's no working needed at all for this next bit. We'll go back to the blue top tabs, General, Color. And we'll do that for Halo as well. And then we just connect those up, close it down, and now here's our 300 meter sun, so that might well be a blue sun. And how cool does that look, and how easy is that, more importantly? If I go to body, you can see that the color is matching, the outer distance is matching, and it's exactly the same on Halo. The outer distance is double, just like we wanted, and the color's matching. Let's pull back a bit. What if this sun's going nova? Let's set it to somewhere like there. Okay. And now it's going to be like a red giant, isn't it? So we'll set that all the way into red. That's quite big, actually, isn't it? Well, that planet's dead for a start. Okay, so I may have gone a little bit crazy with that. Let's reduce this down to 1000. I tell you what, can you even get green suns? I don't know, but it kind of looks cool. So I'm saying yes, you can in science. Oh, and look at that. Because the planet is now completely within the corona in that volumetric light, we're getting the cool shadowing, the blocking from it. Alright, hopefully you've just seen a really basic use of Xpresso, but you've just seen as well how easy it is to set up and then how time saving it is to use. Well, that's it for now, and thanks very much for watching. I'll leave you this one other use of wavy turbulence noise. Here are two lights with adjustments made in the noise tab. You should be able to see those there. And I think that's a pretty good aurora from such a simple effect to set up. Thanks for watching.